I was never really a runner. The way I see running is a gift, especially when you have stage 4 cancer. I'm Anne. I'm running the Boston Marathon, presented by Bank of America. I run for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to give people like me a chance to thrive in life, even with cancer.
Join Bank of America in helping Anne's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/supportAnne. What would you like the power to do? References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation. Copyright 2025.
Saturday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Saturday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Saturday. Saturday, bring it on.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Business. How can you free up your team from time-consuming office tasks? Amazon Business empowers leaders to not only streamline purchasing, but better support their teams so they can focus on strategy and growth. Free up your teams and focus on your future. Learn more about the technology, insights, and support available at amazonbusiness.com.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. I might be Kevin Day, Kieran. I've got no idea what actual day this is. The fact that these interviews now go out on a Wednesday and then a Friday, depending on how much money you pay for the pod, is really messing about with my timeline, to be perfectly honest. So we can't even speculate about what may have happened on any particular day because we don't know what the day before was. But it's... how are you since we last... actually, no, because that's another confusing thing, because we recorded the actual pod on Sunday night this week, which I didn't know where I was Monday morning.
I'm irritatingly cheerful.
As always, yeah, we need to,
yes.
we don't need to ask that question, do we? We have an interview today, Kieran, and it's a very interesting one. It's an interview with Michael Brady, who's the founder of FC100,000, a new subscriber model in an attempt to find a new way of funding the football clubs. And this is what we had to say. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. Before we get into the concept of FC100,000, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and any previous history you may have in football.
Well, thank you for having me on, gentlemen. I'll answer that question backwards. So I have no previous history in football other than the fact that I'm an avid football fan, have been all my life. Season ticket holder, I won't declare where because that will inevitably alienate me one way or the other. My background is in business, so I've been in business for the last 25 years. I've had numerous companies, some of which I've exited and sold, and I'm now the chairman of 4 different companies and sit on a variety of boards. So I guess, I've got a business background, and certainly in the last 5-6 years, it's been very rooted in running boards and running businesses.
What inspired you to come up with the idea for FC100,000 in the first place? Why do you think it's necessary?
So it's a reaction to what we perceive to be a problem across football, certainly across football outside of the Premier League. There are clearly some challenges in terms of football ownership. There's clearly challenges in terms of the solvency of multiple clubs. And we were looking at the political and social context of what's happening with the new Labour government. We were looking at the imminent watchdog or whatever they're calling it, advisor to football that the government are going to bring in. And we were thinking that there may need to be a different form of funding mechanism to try to, in some way, bring in this idea of 50+1. So it was born of a lot of positive motivations around society, community, caring for fans, and trying to move away from a situation where they just seem to be relentlessly ignored and subjugated. That's how it came about.
And before we get into the details of the scheme, I was really interested in the idea that you wrote that it's a social enterprise, which may eventually lead to a fan-owned football club. So I'm really interested in that idea of the social enterprise first. Could you sort of elaborate on that for us?
So that really points to the sequencing of this. So we launched around about a week and a bit ago, and we've got a couple of thousand subscribers. We have barely done any press and barely done any media. This is the first good and proper podcast I've been involved in. If we're to get to a requisite number of subscribers, which I think is probably around 40,000, then we're going to be in a position where we can trigger those subscriptions. At that point, we will know the level of funding that we've got to enter into negotiations with a target club. Now, whilst there have been rumours about certain clubs, we've been quite explicit that we haven't reached an agreement with anybody. We've had in principle conversations with multiple clubs. We can't do anything until the funding is available. So it is fundamentally a social enterprise in which the vast majority of the funds are reinvested into the target club. But without the target club yet being identified, you're kind of, it's a slightly circular argument, but we're not there yet. So I don't have a club and I don't have a set of terms to describe to anybody.
We'll talk about the idea of target clubs later, but I'm interested, Michael, in why it is you want to invest in an existing club rather than, say, start an entirely new club and work your way up. Because some of the clubs you're talking to are not that further up the chain than a club that you might be able to start yourself.
Yeah, it's a fair observation, and I think we've certainly considered going very, very low down the pecking order. Finding clubs who don't necessarily have a huge amount of legacy, don't necessarily have a vast fan base, but do have potential to grow a fan base. And I think that has some benefits in that you don't annoy the local fan base who might think you're coming in to take over and ruin their connection to the club. When in reality the polar opposite is true. But the problem we're trying to address is that, and I'm sure Kieran can comment on this, there are multiple clubs in extremely parlous financial situations. There's the obvious clubs that we're hearing about every day where, you got Yeovil banning the fans and Leyton Orient going into a franchise. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on in football, isn't there? But the ones you're not hearing about are the guys who are, they're plugging away. They're still investing often out of their own pockets to keep the lights on. And yet they're not getting anywhere, right? They don't have sufficient capital to invest in the infrastructure of their clubs to then build revenue lines that allow them to then run businesses that then helps them promote the footballing side. So we think the problem is actually with clubs that already exist, clubs that genuinely are crying out for a solution to this problem.
Well, I will bring Kieran in there, Kieran, because I'd like your... Kieran, I'll say Kieran again, Kieran. I'd like your comments on what Michael had just said. But first of all, specifically, and God knows I'm not the financial expert here, but if Michael were to reach 40,000 subscribers initially, which doesn't seem to me to be that optimistic, it seems to be a realistic number, and if they're paying £5 a month, at what sort of level does £200,000 a month sustain a football club? Or can that only ever be a substantial investment to help other partners?
Well, if it's £200,000 a month, there are clubs in the National League who are losing more money than that. There are clubs in the National League and the National League South who are losing less money than that as well. My concern is we're using the word investment, and I think if we're approaching football as a business, and Michael rightly said it's a social enterprise. Football, it's not an investment; it's a subsidy. That's what owners do. They provide subsidies to allow clubs to lose money to a certain amount. I was talking to our good friend Andy Holt in the last 24 hours, and he's going through some challenging times with the local council at present, and he's pretty fed up. And he says, "Why am I doing this? I've done everything I can to provide revenue streams and to provide this sense of identity and all the things which we believe passionately in on the show. But it's actually difficult, stroke impossible to do. And my concern is, if you've got 40,000 people doing this, go, well, if I'm one of those 40,000 and 12 months later I go, well, what have I got out of it? What's my return on investment? Because you're not going to get a financial return in all probability, because if you go up the leagues, I think somebody wrote a book called Unfit and Improper Persons, where as clubs went through the leagues, they lost more and more money. So progress means that it becomes more expensive. So why would I, as an individual who has no emotional connection to a football club, say that this is money well spent? Because it's not an investment, and that's the issue that I have, Michael.
So the answer is explicitly, it's not an investment. What you're doing is you're subscribing to content. You're subscribing to belong to an experience of watching the club that you are supporting. You're going to watch that journey along the way. We obviously socialize, fractionalize, whatever you want to call it, the funding mechanism whereby 40,000, 100,000, whatever many we get, are supporting and underpinning the finances of that club. If we are able, and it's a big if because we don't know who the club is yet, and we don't know what we're going to produce. If we are able to keep those supporters, subscribers engaged with content and a journey and a story, like Wrexham but without the Hollywood, a story that people are engaged with, then you're right. There is no prospect of a return on investment. This isn't an investment. This specifically isn't an FSA regulated scheme, right? This is do you want to subscribe to content, be part of a club, follow the journey along the way, support its success, and feel like you're part of that, right? So, I guess it is a form of socialism in that respect. We are trying to collectivize the ownership, not the ownership. We're trying to collectivize the funding. FC100,000.com will invest into the club, so it will have the equity holding, but with no expectation of financial return. The only funds that will support that club will come through the subscriptions. So it is quite important that, because it is not an investment.
For new listeners, I should point out Andy Holt is, of course, the owner of Accrington Stanley, and the issues he's having is with the local council who are trying to stop him using the stadium after 7 o'clock in the evening, basically, which is where a massive amount of his revenue stream comes from. Kieran's touched on an important point about investment, but it strikes me, Michael, that we've seen other subscription models before, or potential subscription models before, and you're being more upfront and more honest with what you're offering than others have, because you said that the plan is that you will oversee club operations and you'll be working closely with a team of industry experts. So I'm interested to know whether you've got those experts lined up already, and also at what level of decision making would your subscribers participate? Because, as I say, we've spoken to other people before who promised that the subscribers will have a say in almost everything, from new kits to buying players or whatever. So you're saying to them from the start, you're not running the club. We are running the club. But what else do they get for their £5 a month other than you say that ability to watch the journey unfold?
Well, it's horses for courses, because the specifics of what they get is going to depend on the nature of the club that we work with, and whether we take, a majority shareholding. The objective is to take a minimum of 50% equity holding plus a golden share. And the golden share would then convey certain levels of access to the subscriber group. So the subscriber group, they may have influence over certain reserved matters of board. They may have transparency where they don't presently, where they can see things that you can't normally see within the work of a football club. We may democratize to a reasonable level some decision making around some things which are kind of on the surface but are actually fun. What beer should we choose? Which beer sponsor should we choose? You imagine if you do that to 100,000 people, how many beer companies are going to come and be interested in helping us commercially? So, if you suddenly open up to this 100,000 global audience where you incorporate and support the local fan base too, then you create a load of commercial opportunity. The supporters and the subscribers fundamentally are just providing this funding mechanism, and in return, we will try and offer them a product, and I know that's a horrible word in football, but we'll try and offer them a product which they're compelled and engage with, compelled by and engage with. So I think that's the proposition, and it will live and die on how good a job we do around providing that content.
And do you have these industry experts with football experience lined up already? You do?
We got a great team of people, all of whom are entirely volunteering their time. We've got ex-CEOs of Premier League clubs involved. We've got advisors to various football clubs around the country. We've got legal expertise. We've got, obviously, people like me who've run businesses and built businesses. We've got a bunch of people who are stood ready, who influenced and, helped us get this thing off the ground. So I think we've got a reasonably credible team. Again, until we identify the club and until we work out the structure of a deal with a club, we won't know exactly how this looks or what we need. With one of the clubs we were talking to, our explicit intention was to go in and work almost as the fifth owner. So there are already four owners. They were going to continue to be the owners. They were going to continue to run their football club. And they were crying out for the free volunteered support that we were offering to help them in that journey. So, we're not looking to overhaul a board. We're not looking to boot people out, but we're literally looking to support.
I'm going to come on to that fifth owner thing in a moment, because I think we all know which club you're talking about. But first, I think the closest equivalent to what you're trying to do here in the past was probably my football club, which did a similar thing at Ebbsfleet. I don't think you were involved in that. But it's one of those things, initially, there was a huge surge of enthusiasm for it, and then it didn't quite work out as it hoped. What's the difference between this idea and that plan?
That's correct. So, and it is important to say up front that an advisor to this campaign is Will Brooks, who was behind that 20 years ago. I think, the footballing community that have noticed this are aware of that, so there's no point in me trying to hide it. The Ebbsfleet experience, from what I can understand, and you're right, I wasn't in any way involved, they kind of overpromised in terms of the democratisation piece. So they overpromised in terms of what the fans, what the supporters were going to be able to do. But we were in a different time, right? So your ability to engage the fans with content and the platforms by which you could do it were a lot more limited. Now everyone's looking at 1 million clips a day of stuff. And back then they weren't. They didn't have a black mirror in their hand. So I think there's different mechanisms by which you can engage the subscribers. So that's a big change. It also now, is very easy and cost efficient to take regular monthly payments off people, and people are now habitualized to the idea that paying for content is the norm. Everyone's, lots of people are paying for Netflix and Prime or whatever it might be. So that's normalized now in a way that it wasn't 20 years ago. So you've got a lot more mechanisms by which to connect with the subscriber base, and you've got a much more cost-efficient way of taking the subscriptions. So I think that's changed. But critically, you'll note that I'm never over-promising in terms of what the fans can influence, because I think any influence through a board, filtered through a board representative of the fans, is better than where we generally are now. Right? Any influence, any insight, any transparency that exists is better than where we often are now. And there are a few rare exceptions to that, and you've probably talked about them on this show. But as it stands, fans can't see much. They're very passionate to know what's going on. They don't necessarily have a deep understanding of the financial reality of what's going on within these clubs. We can give them that. And they're not really behind the scenes, right? When you create a nice, colourful, Hollywood level, fly on the wall documentary, you're not really seeing what's going on, are you? You're seeing an editor's cut of, what they want you to see to keep you engaged. We're going to do a pretty raw, warts and all, subject to whichever club it is, expose of what it really means to try and run a football club, what it really means when the roof leaks and you haven't got 30 grand to fix it. We want to really get people behind the scenes, and we think the global audience might be quite compelled by that.
When you think about super successful businesses that are selling through the roof, like Heinz or Mattel, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But there's a secret. The business behind the business, making selling simple for them and buying simple for their customers. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout as Heinz and Mattel. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/promo.
This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV, it's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
Before we talk about clubs and potential clubs, I'm really interested. I saw an interview and you mentioned passion of just a moment ago. Your passionate belief that the gaming community can be a positive force for change. Is that something you're looking to mobilise when you're looking for subscribers into FC100,000?
Where did I put that? Was that on LinkedIn? Obviously, I'm in the gaming community, so I probably was trying to make them feel happy. But
I can't do LinkedIn, so it wouldn't be that. That's too grown up for me. It was an interview I found. So it was great. It's a great interview. But you were talking about tapping into the gaming community. I was really happy because normally you read about people tapping into the crypto community.
Yeah, so, I'm not really thinking about the crypto community, but yeah, I mean, I'm in the gaming community. I don't know whether that was in the context of this campaign, but I do think that there are some learnings from that, right? We're used to distributing content, and I think that there's actually a groundswell of, obviously, gambling is all over football, right? It kind of, for good or for bad, it actually underpins a lot of the finances of what goes on, and pays for the broadcasters to pay for the rights to football. So I think it is there. This campaign, in most respects, has very little to do with the gaming community, other than the fact that I've been in it.
When you came up with the idea, when you discussed the idea, were your plans limited to men's teams or to UK teams only?
I think we're open-minded. I mean, the objective right now would be, I think, probably to find a men's team, and to find a men's team that we can propel through the league. However, we actually have had two approaches from women's teams, and I'm not, instinctively opposed to that. It could be very interesting and it could be very timely. The objective is, can we disrupt the current funding model with something innovative and different? And if that is in men's UK football, great. If it's in women's football and there's a model that works, then great. But at this stage, I just want to try and get 40,000 subscribers to come and give us the potential to fund it.
I'm interested to hear you use that word, because I've seen you described as a disruptor, and I was going to ask you if you're happy to be described as a disruptor.
I'm sure when many of my colleagues in my industry hear that, they'll laugh. I've been involved in lots of new businesses. I can't claim to have necessarily been the most disruptive man in history. I'm certainly not Elon Musk, right? But I'm actually quite pleased about that. This is disruptive, right? This is trying to do something. It has surfaced and platformed a issue which I think needs to be talked about. And I think the amount of media inquiries we've had and the opportunities I've had to talk about it, I think evidences the fact that people are interested. People can see there's a problem. Our solution may only be part of that, and we're only probably going to solve it for one club. But if it inspired something else and it inspired a sense that there is another way, then I'd be quite pleased with what we've achieved.
You were recently in discussions with Scunthorpe United to become what seemed to be, certainly the Scunthorpe owners were talking about you as a potential fifth owner, as you mentioned before. Unfortunately, there were discussions that ended after what you described as a vitriolic reaction from fans. Can you tell us how far those discussions had actually got with the owners at Scunthorpe, and why you think the fans' reaction was so negative? Because it didn't seem that you had a lot of time to sell your idea to the fans.
Yeah, I'll answer that question backwards as well. Let's start with the fans. I think the first thing to say is that I entirely respect anybody's concerns about a scheme that is new, right? There's a lot of very damaged football supporters out there who've been through all kinds of trauma with the owners of their clubs. So I get it. I totally understand that people are cynical and skeptical about anything that's new. I think it's wrong to necessarily generalise the Scunthorpe fans as reacting negatively. I think what actually happened is a tiny minority of people, and this is how the world works now, shouted really, really loudly from a position of, I don't want to say ignorance because that sounds offensive, but using a lot of misinformation and false assumptions. It turned into a bit of a storm, and people got very angry about the idea we were coming, to ruin their football club. And the very opposite was true. In terms of Scunthorpe and what we talked to them about, they're in a pretty typical situation. They're hemorrhaging cash. I think Kieran posted yesterday about their most recent balance sheet. They're hemorrhaging cash. They've got 4 owners who are local, who are passionate, lifelong football fans at Scunthorpe, and who have rescued the club from, I think, the brink of administration. So they saved the club. They now spend their own money keeping the lights on and trying to support the club. Somehow they've managed to, generate a bit of footballing success, and, fingers crossed for them. They're about to get promoted, fingers crossed. And we engaged with them because they were looking for funding, and because I think they had a sense within their ownership team that the future of funding is going to have something to do with content distribution. And this is where I think the Wrexham analogy is interesting. Everyone thinks Wrexham is a couple of Hollywood millionaires, billionaires, wherever they are, funding a football club. Well, the real funding mechanism is a subscription model, right? It's Netflix. It's a fraction of your Netflix fee is going back to Wrexham, and it's a global Netflix subscriber base that are paying for it, really. And I know there's other factors, and I know they've attracted sponsorship, and the Hollywood has brought in a lot of attention. But fundamentally, the funding for it is that they managed to make a really compelling documentary that everyone wanted to watch, and Netflix were prepared to pay for it. So it's a subscription model. The irony is, that's just a bit more vicarious than the one we're talking about. Ours is a direct subscription model.
It did seem, and I'm going to bring Kieran in here again, it seemed that the current owners of Scunthorpe were quite quick to say we can't carry on because of the fan reaction, almost as though that was a handy get out for them. But Kieran, I mean, we've talked about Scunthorpe so often on the show. If ever a fan base is going to be wary of outsiders, it's Scunthorpe, because the current 4 owners are still firefighting the terrible previous owner, aren't they?
Absolutely. They've inherited a huge set of issues which they are having to unravel. The previous owner to that, Peter Swan, I think his heart was in the right place, but his knowledge of football meant that the club was hemorrhaging huge amounts of cash under him. The less said about David Hilton, possibly the better. I'm not a fan, as you're probably aware. And therefore, you can understand that if, twice bitten, as far as the Scunthorpe fan base was concerned, they see anything which is different as being a cause for concern. And therefore, it was a hostile reaction. And there's one thing wanting to protect your club. I think there is a difference between wanting to protect your club and some of the stuff which gets said online, which is unacceptable, and people should know the difference. But it wouldn't have been a club I would have got into conversations with personally, simply because I would have seen that iceberg coming, if you don't mind me saying so, Michael. That and you've only got to look at what's happened to the way that some of the previous owners have engaged with the fans in a very hostile way to understand that there's an awful lot of bitterness left amongst the fan base.
Were you surprised, Michael, at the reaction of some of the fans? It was a small minority, we know. Were you surprised by that reaction?
I think I was. I mean, I understand it, and I understand where it came from. I kind of pleaded to local radio to try and let me explain some of the facts, because I was primarily concerned. I understood the anger, but I was a bit annoyed by the fact the anger was predicated on misinformation and falsehoods. But I get that. They're pretty burnt. They're pretty cynical. My vitriolic comment, maybe that was just a bit angry and agitated from me. But fundamentally, we were offering to try and build a campaign to inject hundreds of thousands of pounds into their football club. And in response, people got death threats. Now, that is the very definition of vitriol. Right? That's toxic. And, that's all we were doing. We were talking to 4 of their fans. In fact, probably 4 of their biggest fans, because they're the guys paying to keep their club alive. And we were trying to do something entirely legitimate. And we've been discussing how we protect their fans from all the crap that's happened in the past. We were trying to make sure that there was continued protection for the assets of that club, for the community assets. We were trying to actually form a plan that would have involved significant capital investment in their town. So this wasn't just about football. This was about putting football at the centre of their community and recognising what a critical part it plays in social cohesion, particularly in a lot of these post-industrial towns. So we were trying to do something genuinely for good. And whilst I take all the challenges, it is vitriolic if you try and do something good and then you get threatened with death. I mean, that's a bit over the top, right?
Yeah.
And, don't get me wrong. I know that there's a lot of keyboard warriors out there who are, pretty brave, and they'll do things from behind a desk, and it's kind of that's their prerogative. But it was a hostile reaction from a few people, not from everybody. We've had way more messages of support from fans around that area and from fans elsewhere in the country who I think have bothered to listen and understand it.
I suppose in a way, though, Michael, it would have been easier for those fans who were hostile if you'd already had the money. If you say, because in a sense, you're talking about potential money rather than actual money you could plough into the club now. Would that be a fair comment?
Yeah, that's not lost on me. I mean, it was a hypothetical storm. These were death threats about a hypothetical situation, which makes it even more ridiculous, right? It's kind of we didn't have the money, but we were quite open about that. In a way, that furore did create quite a lot of attention, and within a few minutes, I was on Talk Sport because they were like, "This sounds interesting. Let's have a chat about that." Now, and there's plenty more circling to have a chat about it. So, in a weird way, that hostility and that storm did actually create quite a lot of attention. And in the modern media environment, I guess all news is good news, right? So it got us out there, and it's allowed me to have a platform to talk about it. It was disappointing that we didn't have the chance to truly articulate what this is, because if we had have had that chance, then I would struggle to understand where the real problem is. If we achieve this and we do protect the fans and we do fund a football club and we do help it back up the leagues if we can, then, this is more sustainable than a random millionaire coming in and playing around with a football club for a bit and then getting bored. This is more, and this has happened a lot. This is considerably more sustainable if you get to the kind of critical mass of subscribers that I'm trying to get to.
Do you know what, Michael? I love TalkSport, genuinely love TalkSport. Some elements of it, I have to say, some less so, but it almost makes me laugh that TalkSport, a story that they should be covering anyway, because it's a brilliant story, there is only prick up when someone gets threatened. Yeah. Oh, great! This is a better story. It's that's for a different pod. Has it? I think I know the answer to these questions. Has it dampened your enthusiasm at all? And do you worry that the Scunthorpe episode might have an effect on the number of potential subscribers?
Well, I don't want to set fire to this again, but the Scunthorpe episode brought in all of our subscribers. It was the only thing we've done so far.
Oh, well, okay.
We weren't even in kind of beta launch, so to speak. Most of the media we planned was coming next week. So it lit a fire, and it lit a good fire in some respects. Putting aside the toxicity, it lit a good fire because it opened up a conversation. And I'm still in the market for respectful conversations where I'm okay with people having a different view. I don't have to kill them, so I'm all right with that. I'm okay with having an actual objective conversation about this. So it lit a fire, and since then, subscribers have come in at a good steady rate, and we've also had 6 clubs, and this is probably lighting another fire, approaches to discuss it. Now,
okay.
Interestingly, all but one of them are again owned by local people who are desperate to do something for their club. So it has allowed enough people to listen. What I've said now, though, I don't want to necessarily associate with any club at this stage, because I want to make sure I've got the subscriber base before we light a fire. And I also want to make sure that we've properly engaged with fans before we announce that we're talking to their club. We did not release any information about Scunthorpe. It was leaked, right? And that's unfortunate. But I think ultimately it probably was a good thing, even though it was a bit of a tricky 24 hours.
I wouldn't expect you to name any of those 6 clubs, Michael, but can we ask what sort of level those clubs are at?
Similar to Scunthorpe.
Okay.
Similar, maybe even a bit below some of them. But I think the one thing that characterises all of them is they've got ambitious owners who are funding their existence and who see the potential for their clubs and the businesses that their clubs are to grow. But what they need is capital investment. I think it's also another common denominator is they get the fact that the future is about content and owning your own content. And if you can create a point of difference with the content that your club generates, then you may attract an audience that's beyond just the couple of thousand people who live near your ground. And I think that I'm afraid, when you look at the economics of this, I'd love to be able to do this with a club where the only people who subscribe are fans of the club. But that doesn't stack up. That just doesn't stack up financially. The clubs who've done that have done it partially, and it's been challenging from a governance perspective, and it just doesn't provide enough funding to actually make it work. So if that doesn't work, and you don't want an oligarch, and you don't want private equity, and you don't want to be messed around in a US franchise, then what does work? The only thing that then could work is expand your ambitions to a more global audience, accept the fact that the guy in Idaho isn't, connected to your club, but is connected to the English football story and does want to follow it because they want to belong to a journey. They think they're in Ted Lasso, or they think they're in kind of, watching the Wrexham thing all over again, but they feel part of it. They're not invested, but they feel part of it.
Finally, Michael, I mean, your idea is going to chime with a lot of our listeners. I mean, we attract, I like to think, listeners who would be more inclined to support you than Todd Bowley, for example, in terms of club ownership. So what would you say to our listeners out there who are thinking, do you know what, I like the cut of this man's jib, but why should I give him £5 a month of my money? What would you say to them?
That's kind. I mean, we're asking people to go to FC100,000.com, and we're asking them at the moment to pledge support. We won't take a penny off anybody until we get to probably around 40,000. We reserve the right to take the money when we feel we have a model that will work with a target club, right? But it'll be about 40,000 to make it really work. I would plead with them that if we can make this work, it really will have a disruptive effect on football funding. And I get that there's quite a lot of hurdles to jump through here. And I get that I've got to produce content that's engaging. But we will give it a good shot. And the worst case, and this is how we were planning on structuring deals with the clubs, the worst case is we've injected money into a club, we've supported that club, we leave it in a better place than it starts, and we create sustainability across that club. And I think, that's I would plead with people to just have an open mind about why we're doing this and what it actually is.
Michael, all the best. Hopefully we can talk to you again this time next year when you'll have your 100,000 subscribers and you'll be helping a club that needs help. In the meantime, fingers crossed, and I'll listen out for you and talk sport.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on. And I'd like to think that I've got 2 more subscribers sat there.
I'll say I'll listen to you on Talk Sport. If it's Simon Jordan, I won't listen to you on Talk Sport.
He was all right. He was surprisingly supportive.
We're stopping this interview now, Michael. I'm having that bit cut.
Cheers, gents. Thank you.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Kieran is clearly a very passionate man, open and honest, and God knows we do need new models of financing football clubs. But I guess Michael's biggest problem is that he's approaching clubs with potential money rather than actual money, and then getting subscribers is much harder if you're talking about potential clubs rather than actual clubs in which they're going to subscribe to, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think to a certain extent he used the word "if" an awful lot.
Yeah.
And I felt Michael was very fair, because when we sort of pressed him, is this an investment? He was honest enough to say, no, it's a subscription. What you don't invest in Netflix, you don't invest in Amazon Prime. But how do Netflix and Amazon Prime persuade you to buy into them in the first place? It's because they've got content. Now, this is a classic case of, does the body rule the mind or does the mind rule the body? In the sense of, until you've got the content, you ain't going to get the subscribers. But if you've not got the subscribers, and I appreciate that he says, we've got volunteers, we've got people who are willing to put a punt on us. How are you going to pay for that initial content? Because it could be fantastic, and in which case paying a $5 a month to see a non-league club, one will presume it to be, or possibly a League Two club for all we know, to see that club make progress and to put out valuable content. And the way that we consume AV, the way that we consume media these days has changed. I'm fully aware of that. Yes, face it, we're beneficiaries of that ourselves. Has some interest. Getting 40,000 people to sign up. We saw what happened at Watford when they tried to get people involved. We've seen what's happened at Crawley Town when their sort of very passionate owners came in. We've even seen what's happened when some of the bigger clubs have launched their own TV channels. They lose money. So if people want to subscribe to it, and that's fine. But like many people, every 5 or 6 months, I go through my bank account and I go, I'm subscribing to too many things already.
Yeah.
And therefore you look to cull things. And you look at the number of subscription models that we are committed to. We are recording this we're recording this session on the 1st of April, when every single utility bill that we're connected to has just shot up. It's a tough market to crack.
Yeah, it's been a while since we had a Smiths lyric crowbarred in, Kieran. Got me quite nostalgic there. I suppose another thing in his favour, though, is unlike some potential subscription models we've seen before, Michael's not promising that people will be making big decisions about running the club. There's going to be no weekly vote about what the team's going to be or what the direction of travel is going to be. He's going to be making the decisions. His panel of experts will be helping him make those decisions. You might maybe choose the pie flavour once a year, but for the most part, what you're doing is buying content, which I think that honesty is very good. Also, I wish we'd had time, Kieran, to actually elaborate on what that content was. And I think if I had my time to do that interview again, I would have picked up more clearly on that, because having said that, £5 a month for some people isn't a lot to be in at the start of a journey, to feel that you have even the tiniest emotional investment in a football club. For other people, £5 a month is way too much.
You're absolutely right. And there are a lot of demands on people. Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the lessons that have been learned by other people connected, directly or indirectly to FC100,000, the Absolute United experiment, and that's what it was. And there's nothing wrong with experimenting. Perhaps the world now consumes football in a different way. If it's 40,000 people spread across a planet, you don't need a very high hit rate. I think that the challenge is the content that we've seen from Welcome to Wrexham was brilliant, but then it was two Hollywood A-listers with a very, very slick production company. I don't know what Michael's team's experiences are, but you've got to get it right from episode 1, because if not, they'll turn over. There are so many competing products for your eyeballs that, let's be honest, I think the broad success that we've had on the podcast, because we had first mover advantage. And if we were trying to enter an existing market for Football Finance Podcast, I suspect we would struggle.
We'd whoever was doing it, we'd muscle them out, Kieran.
Uncle Terry would call.
Uncle Terry, and proper South Londoners, we'd muscle them out. Talking of subscription models, Kieran, we need to wrap this up because it's now 2 minutes to 7 on Tuesday evening, I believe. I'm going to double check that. Is it? 2 minutes to 7 on Tuesday evening, which means in 31 minutes now we have to host a number of people and welcome them into our home, the members of the Price of Football Club, for our monthly Q&A on Zoom. I say prepare. I mean, go down the offie. In my, you need to write a few notes. I need to go down the offie. So if you want to join that Price of Football Club, it's too late for last night now. If you're listening to this, whatever day you're listening to, you can join our Price of Football Club. You'll get ad-free listening. You'll get bonus episodes. You'll get early access to interviews. You'll get a monthly invite into our homes and much more. You can do that by going to priceoffootball.com and you can click on Join the Club to sign up today. If you have a question you'd like answered on our weekly Questions Pod show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter, X, and find us on YouTube. And if you'd like to buy our book, you can find details on the same website, priceoffootball.com. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Price of Football. Price of Football.
This is Ali Maxwell from Not the Top 20 podcast, the number one EFL podcast covering the Championship, League One and League Two. Every Monday, our show is teeming with talking points and surprise results. These leagues and the characters within them are unpredictable and constantly entertaining in their nature. And we never have to speak about VAR. Subscribe to Not the Top 20 podcast on your preferred podcast platform and dive into the best, most in-depth EFL analysis around.